All right, y'all. So there was a hideous, what I would call a terror attack that happened in Buffalo. I want to walk you guys through it. There's quite a bit to say about it. So this is in the Daily Mail. I picked them because they actually did a good summation of everything. Buffalo supermarket shooters chilling 180-page manifesto said great replacement theory of whites being outnumbered drove him to kill. And New Zealand mosque shooter Brenton Tarrant was his inspiration. Now, that guy live streamed his mass murder / terror attack, and so did the Buffalo shooter. Peyton Gendron shared a 180-page manifesto about why he killed 10. It included details of his claims whites are being made extinct by immigration, detailed his hatred of blacks, Jews, leftists, and transgender people. Gendron also shared the names of racist mass murderers who'd inspired him. All right, so let's go through some of this here. It's probably a bunch of stuff that's going to repeat the initial things we saw in the subheadline. The Buffalo supermarket killer says he was driven to kill by the Great Replacement Theory, which claims white people are being driven to extinction by migrants. Peyton Gendron's 180-page Google Drive document detailed his twisted reasons for carrying out Saturday's massacre at the Top supermarket, killing 10. A large part of the manifesto focused on the Great Replacement Theory. It claims whites are being deliberately outnumbered in the U.S. by migrants from other countries to skew elections in favor of Democrats. Now, a lot of people are pointing out, and I think it's fair, is you get sort of a slightly tuned down version of the Great Replacement Theory in basically every major right-wing news outlet, whether it's Fox News, One American News Network, Newsmax. I mean, probably One American News Network and Newsmax are a little more overt with it and a little more brazen with it and wear it on their sleeve a little more. But they're still, they still couch it and they still try to reel it in 10%, 20% in order to give themselves plausible deniability. But of course, probably the lead proponents of this kind of thinking are Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham on Fox News in terms of the big players. Now, what I will say, though, is, and I don't think a lot of people are making this point, it's not like this is new with them, because it's really not. Tucker Carlson has the 8 p.m. time slot on Fox News. He replaced Bill O'Reilly, who was the #1 news host for a very long time. And anybody who's ancient like I am, if you're in your 30s, you probably remember, Bill O'Reilly would all the time rant against the illegal aliens who are, coming in this country. And Lou Dobbs, even on CNN, back when he was a CNN anchor, he fancied himself an independent, but one of his biggest issues was illegal immigration. And, he would talk about the illegal aliens, illegal aliens. And there is definitely a tinge of dehumanization and, they're replacing you to one extent or another. And so I wouldn't say that it's new with Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. I think it's just a slightly repackaged version of the same old school Republican politics. And, it's amazing to me that this kind of thing would animate somebody, because it's hard for me to wrap my mind around the idea that anybody thinks immigrants are a big problem. The overwhelming majority of the time, you have people coming here just trying to create a better lives for themselves. And oftentimes it's immigrant communities that sort of most embody what we would typically call the American dream of work hard, try to get ahead, and look after your family. I mean, that's what I think of when I think of immigrant communities. And there's another idea that's very prominent on the right of they're criminals, which is of course why Trump, when he launched his campaign, said Mexico is not sending their best, they're criminals, they're rapists. I assume some are good people. But the fact of the matter is, there have been some conservative think tanks, like libertarian think tanks. What was it, Cato Institute or somebody like that, did an empirical analysis, and they found that undocumented immigrant communities and documented immigrant communities commit crime at a lower rate than Americans, people born in America. And so even that notion is absurd. So what you can do, and Trump does this all the time, and others do it all the time, you can focus on any individual, undocumented immigrant criminals who commit a crime, but what they try to do is focus on those and try to build a case through anecdotes that these people are dangerous and that's why they shouldn't be here. And so it really is a bunch of claptrap. It's the oldest trick in the book. you try to get working class people to fight amongst themselves as the rich run out the back door with all the money. And we've seen a version of this divide and conquer and scapegoating, certainly my entire life and for decades and decades and decades in American politics. So they say, Gendron said he'd choose, or Gendron, I don't know how it's pronounced, by the way. You guys tell me in the comment section, is it Gendron or Gendron? I'm going to go with Gendron. Gendron said he'd chosen to target the upstate New York store because it sat in the zip code 14208, which he said had the highest black percentage that is close to where I live. Jesus Christ, that's dark. He included a rudimentary map of the store, but didn't name it prior to the shooting, saying he didn't want to tip anyone off should his manifesto end up in the hands of law enforcement. The manifesto said that he'd been radicalized entirely by the internet rather than anyone he'd met in real life, and added that he'd been inspired by Brenton Tarrant. Tarrant is a white supremacist who live-streamed himself murdering 51 Muslims at a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019. Gendron said, "The truth is my personal life and experience are of no value." So there's a picture of him. And then this is the New Zealand mosque killer, Brenton Tarrant. And he killed 51 Muslims in 2019. I remember that. I'm sure you guys remember that as well. There's Dylan Roof. There's Anders Breivik. Gendron said Tarrant radicalized him the most while discussing what had spurred him to shoot 13 people, 10 of them fatally. Also named as an inspiration in the manifesto was white supremacist mass murderer Dylan Roof, who killed 9 black worshippers at South Carolina Church in 2015. And Norwegian killers Anders Breivik, who massacred 77 people in 2011, was also cited as an inspiration by Gendron. Police said 11 of the people he shot were black, with the other 2 white. Like Tarrant, Gendron live-streamed his massacre. Tarrant used Facebook Live, while Gendron used streaming service Twitch. Now, a lot of people look at this and blame Twitch. All I would say is they had no idea this was going on, and if they knew it in advance, they would have axed it. Now, you could say, hey, they should set up a system where they would know about something like this going on. But in the wake of this happening, they, of course, deleted the video because even if you're a big free speech absolutist, I understand the argument that you can't live stream people committing actual crimes because crimes are illegal by definition. So you don't want your platform being used for that. Now, in the past, I actually would have disagreed with that and said, if you leave it up, effectively, what's the harm in leaving it up? You're going to expose this horrendous act, which will turn people off to it more. It's not going to help recruit people. But obviously, in some tiny percentage of the population, they do sort of look at it with a bloodlust. And so anything that's actually illegal, I understand you taking it down, or certainly anything that's a crime of this magnitude and of this nature. And I think it's not inconsistent with being a free speech absolutist to say actual crimes cannot stay up on the platform. So Twitch, in the wake of this, certainly did the right thing and they pulled it down. But we're going to get to other things, which I don't know if they bring it up in this article, but I think it does go too far. Namely, I think they tried, or they did scrub the internet of this guy's manifesto. Now, I don't think you can make the argument that anybody who reads the manifesto is gonna go down the path of being radicalized themselves. And I think it actually does. It is more illuminating when you see it, so you understand why this happened, so you try to prevent it in the future. So I would argue that goes too far. I don't think it goes too far to pull down the actual murders. I understand why you would pull down the murders. It is most popular among video gamers, with Twitch removing Gendron's video less than 2 minutes after his upload. Okay, so they were on top of it as much as humanly possible. A Twitch spokesman said they were devastated that their platform had been used. The Google document that contained Gendron's manifesto remained online for several hours. So they, like I said, they removed that. It was later taken down after Google said its contents had violated the web giant's terms of service. I mean, again, Hitler's Mein Kampf. You're allowed to go into a bookstore and buy that. I'm sure you're allowed to get it online. This is in the same vein as that. I don't think you should take that down. I think it should be up so that we can study this, educate ourselves, so we can figure out how to avoid stuff like this in the future, and how to really dismantle these ideologies and basically stop people from being radicalized in a negative direction. We have to take the problem on seriously as opposed to just sweeping it under the rug. And this is the equivalent of sweeping it under the rug, in my opinion. Screen grabs of its content remain online. They also included hundreds of racist memes and grabs of liberal publications Gendron deemed offensive to his beliefs. So again, is that another picture of him? What does it say underneath here? Gendron, pictured before the massacre, said he'd been radicalized by the internet and says he chose his target site because it had the highest black public. Okay, we already talked about that. And although the manifesto is widely believed to be authentic, with Gendron identifying himself, he used a fake photograph. The snap he uploaded, which he claimed was him, was actually of comedian Sam Hyde. Imagine being that guy today. The image of Sam Hyde posing outdoors while holding an assault rifle has been repeatedly used to falsely identify other mass shooters. Jesus. It is unclear if Gendron used Hyde's image in his own manifesto in a twisted attempt at humor. So far, 2 victims have been identified, both of whom are black. Grandmother Ruth Whitfield. Jesus Christ, dude. Oh, man. You killed an 86-year-old grandma. Was gunned down while shopping for eggs. And store security guard Aaron Salter, a father of 3, was killed after opening fire on Gendron. Salter did so after seeing Gendron shoot other shoppers dead, but the teenage killer had worn enough body armor to protect himself from Salter's bullets. Oh my God. Gendron discussed his hatred of blacks, Jews, left-wing people, and transgender people in his manifesto. He also offered biographical detail of his mundane life, saying he'd grown up in Conklin, New York, around 3.5 hours away from Buffalo. Gendron added, "I was never diagnosed with a mental disability or disorder," he wrote. "I believe to be perfectly sane." Well, I don't know about that one, champ. The killer was arrested after walking out the front of the supermarket and arraigned at a court Saturday night. He has also been charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, although more charges will follow. Gendron spoke only to confirm that he understood the charge, with his lawyer saying he'd deny it. That comes despite him saying he'd plead guilty to his crimes in his manifesto. Gendron also likely faces federal hate crime and terrorism charges, which could see him put to death. So yeah, look, in my opinion, this is a cut and dried example of terrorism, because it's white supremacist terrorism in a very straightforward way, because when you're doing violence for a political or religious ideology, that is the definition of terrorism. Now, oftentimes, in the media and in polite society, people struggle to bring it up when you're talking about homegrown domestic white supremacist terrorism, but that is by definition what it is. And look, I actually looked on Twitter at a bunch of the screen grabs of the stuff you would say. The right is actually hilariously trying to claim this guy's like a lefty. Absurd. I mean, he has a line in his manifesto about how leftism leads to like degeneracy and the collapse of society or something along those lines. Obviously, this guy wasn't a lefty. But look, it is a cautionary tale about the radicalization that can occur online, that the pipeline to the alt-right. And this is why, and I highly recommend, not to do a shameless plug or anything, but this is certainly relevant to the conversation, I highly recommend everybody go check out a segment I did, How to De-Radicalize the Alt-Right, because that's certainly one of the things I'm most proud of, is the fact that this show has, prevented a lot of people, or reversed a lot of people's minds from when they did go down that alt-right pipeline. You might start out with the Stephen Crowders and the Ben Shapiros or whatever, and then next thing you know, you're at the Stefan Molyneux, and then next thing you know, you're at the Richard Spencers or whatever. And it's a thing that we have to tackle head on. And, I like to think of myself as relatively solid in this realm, and so it's important that we can prevent people from going down this path. And, so what actually leads to this? Honestly, I think it's an amalgamation of a million things. I do. I think there probably is he's off in some way mentally. That's pretty clear. And then you mix that with basically being brainwashed into a poisonous and hateful ideology. I don't know what his childhood was like. I don't know what his parents' economic situation was like. But I would imagine in order for something like this to happen, whether it's a white supremacist terrorist, a member of Al-Qaeda, or what have you, it's a whole bunch of factors that come together in a perfect storm of hatefulness that leads to an act like this. And it's hideous. It's hideous. So now let's look at this other one from the Daily Mail. Buffalo white supremacist, 18, threatened a school graduation shooting last year and was given psychiatric treatment, but still legally bought 3 guns. Jesus. Classmates reveal he acted strangely, wore a hazmat suit to school for a week, and scared them with Hitler-esque political views. Peyton Gendron, 18, was investigated by the New York State Police for threatening to shoot his classmates during graduation in June 2021. Police suggested mental health evaluation and counseling. Classmates recall his Hitler-esque political leanings during a political science exercise. Gendron wore a hazmat suit to school for the first week of his senior year to protect against COVID. In his 180-page manifesto, it refers to the paranoid white supremacist theory of white replacement. He looks up to other racially motivated Dylan Roof, and we went through this. At least 10 people were killed, and 3 were reported injured after a gunman opened fire inside a Buffalo supermarket. Gendron had the N-word scrawled in his rifle. Jesus. Targeted a store in predominantly black area and shot 11 people. Black people, police said. Erie County District Attorney John Flynn charged him with 1 count of first-degree murder. The suspect, filmed wearing a military uniform, has been taken into custody by the Buffalo Police Department and will be charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder as early as Saturday night. The suspect was reportedly wearing body armor. As witnesses said, they saw it. We already been through that. Ex-Buffalo cop Aaron Salter Jr., who was working at the security guard, we already talked about that as well. The 86-year-old victim. Okay, so this is one of those instances of, like, usually, sometimes when things like this happen, their neighbor or their family or their friends go, I never could have saw this coming. This is an instance of people who were like, yeah, I saw this shit coming. He had the N-word in his rifle. He wore a hazmat suit because of COVID. He openly espoused Hitler-esque political views. You know, he basically threatened to do a school shooting. No. I mean, look, it is absolutely psychotic that this dude, given these facts, was able to legally buy 3 guns. Now, understand something, guys. I am without a doubt a moderate on the issue of guns. I think if you're a law-abiding citizen, you have every right to own a firearm. I'm not, like, hard left on guns. I don't want to confiscate guns or whatever. But when you look at a system that allows this dude to get guns, man, that's a broken system. That's a broken system. It should be a 1 strike and you're out thing in terms of threatening mass shootings and being able to get a gun. I mean, and they said, the guy who sold him the gun said, we did a background check and there was nothing there. Well, then maybe we need to reform the background check system and make the standards a lot more reasonable. Because every red flag in the world was here, man. Every red flag in the world was here. He also, this guy, again, in his manifesto, went hard on the eugenics and the phrenology and the race science. He's deeply anti-Semitic as well, on top of being just totally racist against every flavor of minority. He believes in, like, the Hitlerian racial hierarchy, and he says he makes exceptions for, I think, Asian people. He thinks Asian people are good and they're hardworking and they're intelligent and they have high IQs. He also exempts Turkish people. He thinks Turkish people sort of fit in that category of, like, passing the litmus test for the white supremacists. But he's against Arabs, he's against Hispanics, he's against black people. And it was just like a buffet of lunacy if you go through his political views. And it's a cautionary tale, man. How many more people like this are out there? And how do we try to fight back as a society and de-radicalize people who might be going down this path? It is, it's ugly, dude. It's ugly. And again, like I said, I would imagine it was an amalgamation of a million things that led to this. Total isolation, mental illness, being brainwashed by ideology, hateful ideology, and just going down a long, winding path where he ends up basically hating life, hating others, and acting on those urges. And it is... We'll see what happens. I imagine he's going to get found guilty. I imagine he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Might even get the death penalty. And this is why I always told you guys for the longest time, I'm against the death penalty as a matter of principle, but only because we get the wrong people 4% of the time, as a number of studies have shown. So I'm not okay with murdering innocent people 4% of the time, so we can't have the death penalty. But in terms of, will I shed a tear? Will I advocate on this dude's behalf for him not to get the death penalty? Hell no. Hell no. If we had a perfect system and we could only get the people who are actually wrong and did it, in that situation, I'd be for the death penalty. And, this guy here is a classic example of actually did it. I feel no sympathy. He's probably TFG, dog. When you go to these lengths, you're probably TFG. Too far gone. You're never gonna de-radicalize this guy. Now the process starts. How do we de-radicalize the next guy? And take them from whatever fringe ideology they may currently be bathing in and bring them back to sanity and bring them back to reason. But it's an ugly thing, and it's a cautionary tale. And I will say, nobody is directly responsible for his actions but him. But there is a difference between being, like, directly responsible and legally responsible versus having some moral or ethical culpability. And I would say to anybody who sort of peddles in that xenophobic, bigoted, softer white replacement theory rhetoric, Well, oftentimes this is the logical end result of those sorts of ideas put into action. So, gonna want to reel it in on that shit, because these beliefs have consequences in the real world, and we're seeing them here. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.